reading to you chapter 12 of this backwards book. It's gone backwards. Anyway, it was April of 1974. In the Marines, I was weak physically when I first arrived in Parris Island, South Carolina. They sent me to a special training camp to practice exercises to build up my muscles and physical stamina so I could enter their boot camp. I put a lot of effort into building myself up physically. I was successful. When I left the Marine Corps 4 years later, I had an appreciation for a lot of good men I had served with. They were not only strong men physically, but they were also men who didn't go out of their way to practice cruelty towards either other men or women. For the most part, they had a tremendous amount of self-discipline along with a moral code of conduct they practiced and lived up to. I thought very highly of so many of them. I remember a saying that some of them lived by. If discipline is not imposed from within, it will be imposed from without. I put so much willingness in as I possibly could into following their example of being a good Marine. Friendship and fellowship were offered to me, but I continued after duty to be withdrawn and isolated. It was like I couldn't feel a higher level of sustained sentiment anymore for anyone. I had very few dates, 2 or 3 with a woman. Nothing came out of it for either of us. I thought that I should save myself for a woman I would marry. Along with the relationship, the sex would be okay for me then. I drank alcohol while I was in the Marines, but I stopped after a couple of bad nights. I couldn't make drinking or being drunk a positive experience for anyone, including me. Something was missing inside of me, and I wasn't even aware of what it possibly could be. It never even dawned upon me the absence of inner light and spirit within me. I got out of the Marines in 1978. I was 30. A short time later, I broke off all contact with my parents again. Mentally, I couldn't tolerate the thought of either of them. The contact that I had with them, even though it was only short letters a couple of times during the year, literally drove me insane with rage and hate. I hated my father. There was never any remorse or regret on his part for his behavior towards me. For my mother, I couldn't stand the idea of her still living and being with him. There was no letter or phone call to my mother. I just disappeared. Away from work, I was living my life as a recluse. It was 1982. I was a blackjack dealer for a small casino outside of Las Vegas. I worked the swing shift. When I came into work one evening, I was with 3 women dealers in the break room about 10 minutes before our shift began. One of the lady dealers from the day shift came into the room. She proceeded to relate to the 4 of us what had happened the day before to one of the dealers, a young woman in her middle 20s who worked on day shift. She had felt physically ill during her shift where she was unable to complete the shift. She had carpooled to work that day with 2 or 3 other dealers, so she had to wait until they finished their shift before she would be given a ride back into town. There were 2 guys sitting at the bar. They found out about her predicament and approached her and said they were just getting ready to leave and head back on into Las Vegas. They came onto her as very nice. She had seen them in the casino before that day. She said okay, she would ride with them back to Las Vegas. The rest of what happened the day before was told by one of the restaurant waitresses whose husband was a highway patrolman who made the police report of what had happened to her. When the 2 guys left the casino with her, they went in the opposite direction of Las Vegas. They kidnapped this poor, defenseless woman who was physically ill and took her out in the middle of the desert and raped and tortured her. Afterwards, they let her go. After the woman day dealer related this to the 4 of us in the break room, the other 3 women dealers, one after the other, replied with the same words to the effect of, it was her fault. She asked for it. She willingly got in the truck with those guys. The guys weren't to blame. It was her fault. I was physically distraught and emotionally sick from hearing of what this poor woman had suffered. When those 3 women dealers, one after the other, said what they thought about this, I found myself going into shock. I was in disbelief of what each of them said, yet I knew I had heard right. I answered the 3 women several times over because they argued with me, and they were in the wrong. This is terrible what happened to her. It wasn't her fault. She didn't ask for it. She was physically ill and in need of help. She didn't ask to be kidnapped, raped, and tortured. Each of these 3 women continually disagreed with me. These 2 monsters found out the young woman's physical address in Las Vegas. They appeared on her doorstep and threatened to do worse to her if she didn't withdraw the criminal charges of kidnap, rape, and torture against the 2 of them. She left Las Vegas immediately and went back to her hometown somewhere in the Southwest. I worked in that casino and in another one for 3 years. I made the acquaintance of several more women who were either physically beaten or were raped by their husbands. What any one of these women experienced had a huge impact upon the makeup of my soul, though at that time I wasn't even aware that I had one. I felt empathy and sorrow towards each of these women. None of them deserved to be treated in the way they were being beat up. I knew how wrong it was. To this day, when I think at length about any of these women, I am flooded with grief and mourning for them and about what they experienced. I remember one woman in particular where I worked. She was a cleaning and maintenance worker. She would sometimes come into the break room and speak with the other women or on occasion to me. She had a deep, tough as nails exterior with a voice to match. She also had a biting, cynical, sarcastic sense of humor that she would let loose on anyone who was near her. I remember thinking more than once that all the women I might want to be with or around, she would be the very last on my list. It was several months later when two of the women dealers were talking between themselves and commenting that earlier in the evening the cleaning woman had been telling each of them of how badly her husband had been beating her lately. Both of the dealers were saying how sad they felt for her. I was taken aback by this conversation. She had always seemed so tough and strong to me. I would not have thought such a woman would tolerate physical abuse from anyone, let alone from her spouse. From that evening on, whenever I was with her, I would extend myself to her by showing her a kindness and gentleness of manner, along with being respectful towards her, no matter her comments about work or anything. I felt compassion towards her. It was late December 1985. I had turned 38 the previous month. I rented a motel room for a week with enough money left over to eat well, all snacks during the week. When I woke up on the seventh morning of the week, I made several trips out to the dumpster, throwing all of my personal belongings and clothes into it. I checked out of the motel with the clothes on my back, wearing a heavy winter coat. I carried a small gym bag with 2 towels and a pistol in it. I had made the decision before I checked into the motel a week earlier that I was going to kill myself. No ifs, ands, or buts. I was through with these contrived psychodramas that I would create and act out in. In the very last act, I would try to push myself over the edge into oblivion, where I would make an attempt to end my life. I was full of arrogance and self-centeredness. I didn't want to care about anyone, including myself. I actually believed in the spiritually insane thinking that the very best and noblest action I could take and perform on this planet was to kill myself. The last couple of days that week, I would stand in front of the bathroom mirror with the empty pistol and practice pointing the gun at my head and pulling the trigger. As the end of the week came, I began to be filled with dread at the fast approaching checkout day. My arrogance had fallen off a cliff. I had thoughts of my writings and what I would be missing. Writing and reading books had given me both a spark of life and light over the years. I remembered my passion and enthusiasm at being alive when I would become engrossed in a book I was reading. I would pour body and soul into my imaginings of how the characters' lives were working and playing out for them in the story. I remember the feeling of accomplishment I would experience after an hour's session of writing. I would try to provoke thoughts and inspire spontaneity within me by writing fast and putting down on paper whatever came into my mind. I wanted my thoughts and mind to be pure. Obscenity, sexual thoughts in my past were not allowed to be written about. During the week at the motel, I didn't do any reading or writing. I watched TV, slept, and ate junk food. The checkout day came. I left the motel. I prolonged the day. I fiddled around in town until nightfall. Until night fell. It was 10 p.m. I walked out to the highway. It was windy and freezing cold. I pulled out the 2 towels I had in the gym bag. One of the towels I draped over the top of my head like a woman's scarf, covering my ears. The other towel I wrapped around my neck, covering my throat. There was a movie I had seen a couple years ago about French Foreign Legion. It was titled March or Die. I liked the title a lot. I was a military guy. My game plan for my scripted drama was to take off walking, and when I became tired and my legs were ready to give out, I would crawl up on one of the hillsides and into the forest. Myself point blank in the side of the head, right above the ear. I would be dead and done with this life. Good riddance. I was filled with terror, frightened out of my mind, as soon as I took the first step upon the gravel alongside the highway. The obscenities started. A full-blown, hell-bent rage. I was cursing and shouting to the cold, empty air as the traffic whizzed on by. All the obscenities that my mother and father used to call me, including the most vile and filthy one that they would use over and over, the obscenities escaped and flew out of my mouth. I couldn't hold them back. They exploded outwardly from deep within my gut. They were unrelenting. I screamed and blasted them full force at the blackness of the night. I don't remember how much time passed. My voice became hoarse, weakened. The obscenities stopped. I asked myself, if you could live, what would you live for? The answer was like a hard smack in the face. Sexual lust. All the years that I had prided myself on being pure in my thoughts were out the window. I began to experience the wretchedness of a being falling into a descent of unabated, roaring sexual lust and fantasy. I continued walking, so it went for the rest of the evening and into the early morning hours. Hour after hour marching, alternating between screaming and cursing at myself and then the sexual fantasies and lust. It was near 5 a.m. I wanted it to be over. I climbed a hillside and into the forest. There was an empty space on the ground. I was deserted. I set my gym bag down. I pulled out the pistol. I was totally beat physically and exhausted mentally. The obscenities and sexual fantasies dissipated into the thin mountain air. They were gone. I deserved 5 minutes of quiet without obscenities and sexual lust, and then I would pull the trigger. I lay down on the ground. It was winter. The ground was as hard as a rock. It was like lying down on a block of ice. From all the physical exertion of walking and now stopping, my whole body broke out into perspiration. I started shivering, shaking and trembling. I held the loaded gun. I couldn't think. I cursed. Suddenly, I knew intuitively I wouldn't be able to shoot myself. I wanted to live. I got up from the icy ground. I found my way back down to the highway. My life instinct beat forcibly inside me. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I was going to make an attempt to do the best that I could and make a go out of living life. I stood on the gravel next to the pavement of the highway. I stuck my thumb out to hitchhike. Traffic was light. The night was turning into the morning of the day. A car stopped and I got in. I ended up in San Francisco. I was optimistic. I was euphoric at being alive and having another opportunity at living life. It was late afternoon, maybe 6 months later. Poor guys and I were standing around one of the benches in Civic Center Park near City Hall in San Francisco. 4 of us were indigent. We usually stood in at least 2 food lines a day to receive a free meal. We were short of money. We were thankful for the meals and the nourishment they provided to take us into the next day. All 5 of us had come into San Francisco about the same time, within a few months from each other and from different parts of the country. At one of the homeless shelters or in a free room that the city was providing to us at one of the bottom end hotels. We were talking just to pass away the time, and the subject turned to whether or not each of us believed in God. We went around one by one and said yes or no. 4 of us said that we were atheists, not agnostics, or having doubts about whether or not God existed, but flat out atheists. One guy said that he believed in God and enjoyed going to church on Sundays when he could. I remember standing there thinking, how odd is this? 5 guys ending up on Skid Row in San Francisco from wherever, and 4 of the 5 are atheists. That can't happen much at all. Three of the guys were alcoholics, including me, and one was a drug addict. I went to my first recovery meeting in 1986. Time passed. It was 1988. I had 4 stages. I had a deep, profound appreciation and gratitude towards the professionals who helped me out and showed care and concern towards me. The social workers, therapists, psychiatrists, nurses, hospital workers, and medical people who drove the emergency ambulances to pick up people such as me who were acting out in public with suicide dramas. Twice they picked me up from a deliberate drug overdose from alongside. They brought me into the hospital. I was brought in to see, I'm guessing, the doctor who was in charge of the psychiatric ward, its patients. It was just him and me sitting in his office. I was across from him at his desk. He said to me coldly, "What do you want?" "We just had you as a patient for 10 days and we released you earlier this morning. Not even 2 hours after we release you, you are picked up again and brought back here. You have given everyone here who signed a release that said you were okay and to let you go a black eye. What is going on with you?" I said to him, "When I was here, the social worker told me that if I attempted suicide again with another drug overdose, that I would be involuntarily committed to Napa, the state mental hospital. That is what I want. I want to be put in the state mental hospital to live." He paused for a few moments with exasperation. "That's not going to happen. Being that you've been here 4 times during the last year, you've accumulated a hospital bill of over $26,000. You are indigent, a homeless person. You have no means to pay your bill. There are other people who want and need our help. We only have so many resources from the county of San Francisco to go around. We have done all that we can to help you. We are going to let you go again today, and when we do, don't come back." He said the latter part very emphatically, looking very stern. That was the end of the conversation. I left the hospital later that day. I never again went back. I felt deeply ashamed that I had abused the hospitality of the hospital workers along with the limited resources from the county of San Francisco. I regretted causing the many employees, hospital staff, nurses, and doctors to have had such a bad experience because of me. Later that year, I had an outpatient appointment with a therapist. For most of the past and some of what was done to me by my father, she had treated me very well. During our time together in therapy, she wanted to help and assist me. She said to me with all earnestness, "Can you think of anything in your past that you can be thankful for?" I was immediately indignant. Hadn't she been listening to what I was telling her? I said no. The session ended outside. I was stomping on the sidewalk on my way back to my room. I was still angry about the therapist asking me that question. I felt a sudden impact and jolt inside my mind. I slowed down. The flash of intuition that came to me immediately was that I had just said one of the biggest lies I had ever told anyone in my life. I didn't comprehend this instinctive feeling and intuitive thought at all. It couldn't be true. Hadn't I experienced days, months, years of terror and physical torture from my father? I was baffled by what had just impacted me now. I was just like someone, it was just like, it was like someone had just smashed a brick up against the inside. It literally had just come right out of the blue, yet it was so wrong and untrue. I was not lying. How could there be anything in my childhood or teenage years to be grateful for? Absolutely nothing. Yet I remained disturbed. I examined as far deep and back in my past as I could go. I was convinced there was nothing worthwhile there while continuing my way back to my room. I was in the early part of 1989. One of my best friends was dying. I had made his acquaintance from standing in several food lines with him. He had taken me to my first Alcoholics Anonymous recovery meeting when I first arrived in San Francisco. He had recently, 6 months ago, gotten on Social Security for a mental disability where he received a check of over $1,000 every month. He was renting a room in a woman's house. This was doing him in. Where before he was on welfare and going to food lines to survive, now he had enough money coming in every month where he could afford a small room to stay in. He could either go out to eat or prepare his own meals. He chose to do neither. What he chose to do, for the most part of the 6 months that he at this woman's house, was to eat seldom and to drink nonstop. He had been doing this since he moved into this woman's house. He was 42. He was bedridden. One of his other friends and I finally convinced him to let us call 911 for emergency services for an ambulance to take him to a hospital. He had been to the hospital several times over the years. They had always been able to help him get his health back. It wasn't to be this time. He passed away the second day in the hospital. From what I've been told, some heavy drinkers' bodies go into toxic shock when they stop drinking abruptly without taking their bodies gradually off the alcohol. He was a gentle man. He was my friend. He was a positive influence upon me in a way of a higher good and of an inspiration for me in my own attempt at inner being. I began to spend more and more of my time living outdoors on the streets of San Francisco. A couple days, weeks, and months here and there would add up to 2 years living not in a homeless shelter but on the streets. Believe me, it's a dismal existence. Although in my life I have lived as a homeless person for 3 years, 1 year out of a car, and the other two on the streets of San Francisco. The passing monotony of time is a mental killer. I am thankful for the public library and the many books I was able to gain from it. If a person isn't mentally ill before they are a homeless person, they will be afterwards. I went to donut shops that were open all night. I would buy a donut and a cup of coffee while reading the book I brought with me for about 45 minutes before going back out early 3 a.m. routine. Fiction novels were my favorite books. I would try to absolutely immerse as much of myself in the stories and within some of the characters. Doing so helped me to retain a piece of my mind and hold on to a spiritual sanity. Despite my circumstances, I was an okay person, not harming or being a public nuisance towards anyone. I would ride different buses and the Bay Area Rapid Transit train throughout the evening and early morning hours, cat napping and catching up on my sleep. The battle was to hold on to what spiritual sanity that I had and not to be preyed upon by muggers or thugs. When the weather was wet and chilly, I would stand for time on end in doorways or of closed storefronts. I would say the serenity prayer that I had learned in recovery. I wouldn't use the word God that was at the beginning of the prayer, but I would recite the rest of it to myself. Grant me the serenity to accept things I can't change, courage to change things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It helped me out in maintaining a life within. I would say the prayer over and over. It gave me pause for thought in order to be in an okay way. Going to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings during the day and evening helped me to sustain what spiritual sanity I experienced. I would have a warm place to sit along with a cup of coffee and would listen to other members share their own battles against the temptations of drinking again, or of them just trying to live their lives without self-destructing or self-sabotaging their hopes and dreams. I would feel physically and mentally relaxed during the meetings, but when I would leave and step outside the door, all the tension and stress would return to my body and mind. It would be 7 years, 1986 to the beginning of 1993, before I was willing to make a sincere attempt to fulfill an inner commitment not to drink. I would do this one day at a time. Each day I would attempt to acquire a desire not to drink that day by doing any one of the many suggestions or guidelines in the program. The one suggestion that I followed many times over was not to drink alcohol or put any intoxicating street drugs into my body, no matter what. My present day. To aspire and strive towards inner being as an act of inner creation of light and spirit, I hope for a willing spirit, one of inspiration and light, to keep a sacred unknown alive inside me. It is thanks to the friendship and acquaintanceship of others that I feel hope for myself. When when I first come into waking consciousness in the morning, that is when I am most vulnerable. Not to think, I wish I were dead. not to bury myself with past shame or failure, to work or to work on having a genuine concern for others, to look inward where the direction of my living soul resides. I no longer experience a spiritual insanity thinking that the only sane thing to do is to be absurd or insane. Spiritual nonviolence, civility, being polite, and courteous have helped me to practice an honorable, noble ideal of brotherly love. There is still a place within me where the truth is a mystery and has yet to be solved. Yet to me, myself, as either a victim or a failure, not to see myself as either a victim or a failure. To make a sincere attempt to heal and negate the harm that was done within me. To bring forth an inner light by allowing it to come into being. To attempt to lessen my memories of pain, shame, and humiliation by being open to higher levels of feelings for my fellow man and woman, to be with another through an inspiration of light and attempted inner being and feeling of liking and caring. I must battle against what was done to me within because I want to be worthy of another's friendship for making their acquaintance. I try and experience the phenomenon of life and inner creation through light and spirit. I breathe in a warmth and a wellness of being. I want to try and experience the passing of time of my day as a spiritual adventure. There is a path of a higher good and of trying to brighten an inner light, which I think is inside me. To try to obey moral imperatives from within a sacred unknown that resides within me. I try to keep it consciously alive. I have been entrusted with it, a guiding inner light, as a gift from on high, to try to experience the moments of my day as an adventure of spirit and inner light, being a detective and an explorer upon an inner landscape of thought, feeling, and being. If I yield to a fear of anyone knowing me as I really am, and if I remain silent of my own life experiences, then there is a risk of danger. Then there is a risk and danger of reverting back to becoming a victim of my own self-hatred, self-destruction, and sabotage. To try to give expression to the movement of light and spirit within me, to search for an inspiration of spontaneity from within my thoughts, feelings, and being, to use the feelings and experiences of my past traumas to better feel and understand the inner lives of others victimized by the ill doings of men and women, to reject evil by seeking a shared intimacy of a living spirit and a brightening of light with my fellow man and woman. I was not only a drunk driver, but at times a blackout drunk driver as a teenager. I would be sitting drunk in the bar, and then the very next thing I would be conscious of was waking up in my bed the next morning with no memory of how I got there. No, I don't want for any kind of those behaviors to be the expression of who and what I am. I am clean and sober today because I want to be. I am obeying and following a moral imperative from a sacred unknown within me. That is my priority in my mental state of being. I don't want to abandon what spiritual sanity I possess and experience during my life. I want to make a struggle within towards a higher realm and inner dimension by following a path of a higher good and of trying to brighten a light within. I want to experience a miracle of feeling and a spontaneity of inner being. I want to be real and genuine and not a delusion or lie. I want to acquire a passion to be alive, along with fulfilling an inner commitment to practice being in a way of light and spirit. I shamed myself in front of my biological father out of fear and terror. I told myself that I had to survive for the future to come to be for me. I had a hope that I would have a life that was worth living. Part of keeping alive my hope was the creation of inner beauty and light from my thought, feeling, and innermost being. It came to be a practiced art of mine during the time that I was being beat and tortured by my biological father. It was the thought of appreciation and thankfulness for the good and virtue that I knew intuitively was in other human beings. I knew there were such people from being with and around my grade school teachers and Ernie, who worked at the YMCA and organized the youth baseball games during the summer for us kids. I also observed people in TV shows and in the movies. These were the people I wanted to be worthy of being with, followed along a path to continue to desire to live and hope for a brighter day and tomorrow. I followed along a path to continue to desire to live and hope for a brighter day and tomorrow. Not to shutter away windows of inner beauty and light, not to be blind to my plight, a lone struggle fought within, to kindle a passion to alight my imagination with a brightness and a warmth, not to die within, speckles of soft lemon light to enlighten hidden depths of being, to experience the breath of life as a spiritual phenomenon of inspiration and inner being.